Senator Bolkcom, thank you so much for sitting down with me today.
It's good to be here, Katie.
Let's get right into it, and let's talk about how party politics played a role in this session. It was the third longest session in Iowa history, and party politics really seemed to dictate the length and severity of the debates. So let's talk a bit about that.
Well, good question. It's good to be here. It's good that the session's over. I think on balance it was relatively productive. Your viewers will recall that for the past 4 years we had a Democratic governor in Chet Culver and a Democratic legislature, and the elections last fall changed that. We now have a Republican governor in Terry Branstad, and the Iowa House, which had been Democratic, went to Republican control by a vote of 60-40. In the Iowa Senate, we maintained a Senate majority, Democratic majority, but only by one vote, a 26-24 majority. And so the macro dynamic changed, and what specifically changed, I think, is that we elected a number of very conservative Tea Party subscribing members to the Iowa House, probably a dozen or so, and I think they came in seeing some sort of mandate, and the governor to some degree, a mandate to cut government and to cut services and cut the investment that we've been making in the people of the state, and allege that we had a substantial budget crisis in so doing. The facts didn't really bear that out in terms of where the state is fiscally. We're in top 5 in the country, probably in terms of fiscal health. Mm-hmm. Minnesota just went through a shutdown, over $1.5 billion deficit. The state of Iowa, we have about $1 billion in surplus in the bank, and so the debate centered really around the role of government and the size of government, and the party dynamic certainly accentuated that.
And that question of role of government stretched into issues such as education and healthcare and the environment, and I'd love to talk about education, because that from preschool to funding our public universities, everything was up for grabs in this session. How did it all pan out?
Well, it's pretty clear that in this economy, there are many people going back to school. In this economy, people that are entering the job market need more skills, not less skills, and we turn to our public education system principally to help citizens get those skills. And in each of those areas, the Governor Branstad and the House Republicans proposed essentially either no new resources, in the case of the K-12 system, for 2 years, no new resources to the community colleges, $40 million cut to our public university families and students. And we fought against all that, of course, including also the governor had proposed eliminating or changing how we paid for universal preschool. Mm-hmm. What we have found, which was a Democratic policy that was put in place a couple of years ago, is working extremely well. It's a terrific investment in every 4-year-old. It's voluntary. But when those youngsters show up at kindergarten, they know their alphabet, they know how to stand in line, they know how to kind of get along and become successful students right off the bat. The Republicans proposed to eliminate it. We held our ground and sustained that program at a slightly reduced funding level, but that was one of the bigger issues of the session. Will we get rid of universal preschool for our kids? And at the end of the session, we said no.
Let's talk a little bit about the budget. Am I right in assuming that the budget is usually the last thing that ends up getting decided on, because you've had to decide what initiatives are going to go through and which ones aren't, and then you have to figure out how to fund them, of course. Right. So a lot of people, a lot of members of the media were noting that social issues were being discussed for almost a little over half of the session this time around, which I don't think is the norm. Did the budget get enough time? Do you feel like there was enough time to really get those line items, everything funded the way that you want it to be?
Yeah, we were supposed to be done around May 1st. We got done on June 30th, so there was sufficient time.
With that extension, it was getting enough time.
But there were, the social issues were front and center the entire session up until really the last few hours before we went home. We were still arguing and fighting over whether or not low-income women who had been raped or subjects of incest, whether we would pay for their abortions or not, whether the public dollars would go for those. Something that we've done in Iowa since 1978 and have had kind of a truce, if you will, around Medicaid-provided abortions. So that was one issue, but there was a vote in the House to ban contraception, to ban all abortions. Certainly there was a vote in the House, not in the Senate, on banning same-sex marriages and creating a constitutional amendment to do that. And so a lot of time was eaten up, and then another bill on banning late-term abortions, women that typically find significant problems with their pregnancies that have late-term abortions. There was an attempt to ban those. So we spent a lot of time on that, and we spent a lot of time on the budget. I mean, we were making the case, for example, in the K-12 system, the Republicans proposed no new money for our local schools for 2 years. And we said, well, that's unacceptable. And so we negotiated no new money in the first year, but a 2% growth factor in the second year. So there was a lot of time spent on negotiating. And I think the other thing that was new, we have a new governor who's back in the job, and we had a new Speaker of the Iowa House, and of course Senator Gronstel's the Majority Leader in the Senate. The leaders working through their negotiating relationships and their trust-building relationships, I think, was part of the reason it took longer. We had some new people and somebody that had been there but's back, and I think it took longer for them to solidify a relationship of trust and in terms of moving forward and negotiating really all these specific deals. Because at the end of the day, most of the negotiation happens between the leaders on behalf of the members, and the members, of course, have to vote to agree with that. But new players and a new dance, and it took some time doing a few rehearsals.
So would you say with this session under the belt, we're looking at 2012 now that rapport, if you will, has been established, do you think it'll be a little easier going, or do you think party politics are going to continue to cause a lot of initiatives to be proposed that really aren't going to see the light of day?
I think next year we'll get done on. I think we'll get done on time. We have an election. People like to get done as quickly as possible in the second year of a legislative session to get people back home and on the campaign trail. So that'll be out there. But I do expect it to be a kind of a rough, bumpy session. The anti-abortion folks are there. The anti-gay folks are there. That are represented by these kind of more extreme viewpoint members on both the role of government and then the social stuff, that they're going to want to get another bite at the apple to fire up their troops in their base for the elections next year. So I expect that all these really bad ideas that are not popular with Iowans but popular with a segment of the Republican Party will eat up a lot of time next year. But I think at the end of the day, we will get done on time and get people back home to campaign.
I know that environmental issues are really close to your heart, and you've worked to bring alternative energy sources into the state. Protecting our natural resources it's always been on your radar. What were some of our triumphs and what were some of our failures in this session? Well,
it was mostly do nothing to really bad. There weren't any really progressive policies moved forward. There were a couple bills that I worked on. One was a ban on bisphenol A, or BPA, and sippy cups and baby bottles. BPA is a synthetic estrogen thought to cause breast cancer. And we moved a bill out of the Senate, and the House didn't take it up. That was one bill we worked on. There was a bill providing a tax credit to residential consumers and small businesses to put solar collectors in part of the energy mix of a home or a business. That passed the Senate, didn't move forward in the House. The big picture on the environment in Iowa is we have about a $15 million budget of state resources going to natural resources. It got cut by $3 million. We're at a 1987 funding level for natural resource environmental protection issues in our state. That is pathetic. We have a $6 billion budget, and we only have agreed that $15 million of it is going to go to protect our natural resources and our environment. We are making very little progress. We're going backwards, actually, and that was a huge disappointment of this session. More recently, there's been a couple of people moved out of administrative posts at the Department of Natural Resources actually this week. The governor is putting people in place that have less interest and less experience in protecting our resources and in protecting our environmental quality. So I think people are concerned about environmental issues. We've got a group in charge now that really could give a darn about protecting our water and air.
Let's talk a little bit about the gun issue. We made it a lot easier for folks to carry concealed and openly carry weapons in their state. At mid-session, people were saying, hey, you guys have to define this law more clearly so that we understand how to enforce it. What came out of that?
Well, last year we made a change in how people get permits to carry guns, and I think it was a mistake. Our past system gave every county sheriff in the state the ability to assess whether an applicant for a permit was somebody that should have a permit, and looking at mental health history, looking at criminal history and record and the like, and that system worked well. The legislature and the governor decided to change it. I was opposed to that and did not support that. Since the new law went into effect, there's been a lot of stories about people getting permits, and including a story here in Johnson County, our sheriff, Lonnie Pokrabic, raising pretty substantial concern that a number of permits have been issued to people that have minor criminal offenses, as well as some concern about mental health background, concerns about people's mental stability and the like. There is some ability for sheriffs to look at criminal record and mental health history, but I think thousands more permits were issued as a result of this change. I don't know that it makes us any safer. I do know that I had legislation this session to essentially ban firearms in all public buildings, so that city councils wouldn't have to make votes in every city or every county board meeting or courthouse. The local elected officials would have to make a motion and pass an ordinance to prohibit firearms in those buildings. That did not move forward. So we've left it up to local governments to make that decision, which they're free to do, and local businesses as well are allowed to post signs at their businesses to alert customers if they don't want guns on the premises,
and you
not
are
to bring
seeing
them
those
in.
signs
Yeah, you
now
are.
all over. It seems you're seeing more signs as the days go on. And it seems that this is one of those issues that initially sort of fell under this idea of less government, and then the government had to step in and say, well, we need to define this more. We actually do need to govern this issue.
Yeah, well, we do have permits. There's states like Arizona where you don't even need a permit. You can just carry, and certainly there's a lot of interest. There's advocates for those positions.
Sure.
I think our former system with every county sheriff having some oversight over this was working quite well, and I'm really, really sorry we moved away from that.
Commercial property tax reform was cited as one of the important issues that Republicans, Democrats, the governor, everyone said, we've got to deal with this in this session. Did it get dealt with?
Well, we all agree that commercial property tax is a substantial issue in Iowa, and I'm disappointed we were not able to get agreement between the governor and the Senate and the House on this. The Senate Democrats proposed a plan that would provide more than a 40% reduction in commercial property taxes to almost 85% of Iowa commercial property taxpayers.
They would only tax 60% of the total value of the property, is that?
Actually, it would work based on providing a rollback, if you will, to a certain amount of valuation over the 4 years of the program. We were willing to spend $200 million in the form of a tax credit directly to the property taxpayer to do that. And our proposal would not result in a massive residential tax hike to residential property taxpayers. The governor's and the Republican proposal in the House was a 25% proposal. The governor's was 40%, and essentially it would have resulted in a massive increase in taxes to residential property taxpayers as we gave relief to commercial property taxpayers. It would also have provided a huge windfall to large out-of-state corporations. Ours was focused more on smaller Main Street Iowa businesses. The Republican proposal was focused equally on everybody, and so in the case of Walmart, they'd be looking at about a $7 million property tax reduction statewide. Places like Casey's General Store, Target, Best Buy, in most cases, in a lot of cases, those big box retailers are not Iowa companies. That money would essentially just leave Iowa, and that money would not be available to support local government services, local schools. And we thought that was the wrong way to go, to spend several $100 million, one, on out-of-state corporations as opposed to Iowa businesses, and two, that residential. We heard a lot from residential property taxpayers, don't raise our taxes to give commercial property tax relief. And so at the end of the day, the governor really was not interested in negotiating. He felt his proposal was the proposal. The challenge I think the Republicans faced with that proposal is that our proposal was just substantially better proposal to more property taxpayers. And ours also had the support of the cities, the counties, the community colleges, and the local schools, all entities that would have been dramatically affected by this loss in revenue. So we'll be back. I mean, I think this will be a huge issue next session. As I said, we all agree we ought to make some progress on this. We think the approach is important. We don't want to give commercial property tax relief and at the same time undermine the ability of local governments to be partners in economic development with local chambers, with State Department of Economic Development. And I think the proposal that was brought forward by the Republicans, we heard repeatedly from local elected officials, this is bad. This would be bad for us, and the Senate version would be a better approach.
Redistricting was very controversial, and in some cases it bound or pulled apart certain voting districts. How do you see this affecting Iowa going forward, and what are some of the more significant redistricting incidences in the state?
Well, I thought it would take longer and be slightly more contentious than it was. We have the opportunity to look at 3 different maps in succeeding order. We decided after we got the first map that it was competitive for both the Democrats and Republicans, and so certain members, not to a member liked it, but the majority of members thought I can go home and either move or run in this district and be competitive. We also went from 5 to 4 congressional seats in this cycle, including the separation of Lynn and Johnson counties into 2 separate congressional districts, which is a pretty big change for our part of the corridor in our region. But by and large, there were a number of districts where existing legislators got thrown together. There were a couple where there were 2. There were at least one where 3 sitting legislators all got thrown into the same district, and people are now making the decision on whether they'll move, and some of that's happening, or whether they'll seek re-election, or in some cases maybe even run against 2 incumbents and have a face-off and see who comes out. There were a number of districts that don't have anybody living in them that's currently elected, so considered open districts, and people are looking at moving into those districts, and some of that's already been happening. So I think it's a jump ball this next election in terms of how competitive it's going to be. It is a presidential year. My hope is that we have a really solid, strong turnout and get more young people involved. I think another year of people seeing kind of the perspective of government's bad and it has no role in our lives from the Tea Party elements. I think people are waking up to the fact that no, there is some really important roles that government plays, like educating our kids, keeping our streets safe, and making sure we have a strong healthcare system, and we have to invest to have those things. Those things are not free, and we have to invest to have them. So I think as another year of this conversation goes forward, I think people are going to hopefully show up at the polls and make a new decision about the direction of our state.
Well, and you mentioned upcoming elections, and historically in the United States, when there's been high unemployment, there's been higher voter turnout, and of course we are experiencing high unemployment. What was done to help our unemployed? in this session?
Well, that's a couple things. I mean, I think it was a fairly lackluster session on job creation activity. There were a number of initiatives that the Senate and the Democrats have proposed. I mentioned one of them earlier, the solar tax credit. Mm-hmm. There's a huge workforce being trained in Iowa right now to do renewable energy work. This incentive would have put some of those people to work. There was a tax credit to help small businesses with their health insurance costs, employers from 2 to 10 employees, passed in the Senate. The House didn't take it up. We spent a great deal of time on the governor's proposal to establish this private nonprofit organization to take over all our economic development work. I think that's going to be a mistake in the long run. Economic development is not that complicated in a way. We have more than 30 different programs in state government to encourage business development in Iowa. We certainly can continue to work on that. We have a substantial amount of money that we spend on this, some $300 million a year. So we have some active programs. And then one of the negative things that happened is we're going to see the closing of a bunch of the workforce development centers that are located around the state. This is your $5.9 billion budget. This is your less government. This is government's bad. Is to close a bunch of workforce development offices at a time when workers need support in updating their resumes, getting new skills, and finding new employment. It seems like the wrong time to be closing workforce development centers. But that's the budget that the governor supported and put forward and the Republicans wanted to pass. So we fought that as long as we could. There were a number of things that were prevented. There were things that went forward that were really not very helpful. We have a divided government, and so we had to compromise and negotiate on all sorts of different things. We were not able to keep, and will not be able to keep, all the workforce development offices open. So in general, I think it was fairly lackluster state initiatives. There were a number of things proposed that didn't get done, and I think some of the things that did get done are not going to be very helpful.
So what were some of the good ideas that nothing happened with, that will be brought back up in 2012, that may or may not happen, but those good ideas that got glossed over this time around?
Yeah. Well, I hope that we can get back on in the area of renewable energy. It's obviously probably, my judgment, the next big job creator. Mm-hmm. Helping people move into providing more of their own energy where they live and work, whether it's wind or solar. We're seeing development of solar collectors all over the country. We have no state policy to encourage that. We need state policy to encourage that.
And we're surrounded by states
We're surrounded by Wisconsin and Illinois and Minnesota. They're all mm-hmm. excelling. They're all, in fact, bringing manufacturers to those states that actually produce the technology that's being put up on buildings in that state, in those states, and that's you got to have some demand for the technology before you get the manufacturers to come and produce the technology.
So in your estimation, it would be, let's create incentives to encourage people to have these technologies attached to their homes and businesses. Then we're going to have a need for the manufacturing, which will create jobs, installation. Okay.
Precisely. Mm-hmm. It's the story of the wind industry in Iowa. We have a good wind resource here. We had people come here and build these, construct turbines all over the mm-hmm. state. The turbine manufacturer said, well, geez, there's a great resource here in the upper Midwest. We're going to do more of this. Let's do manufacturing. We've got like 2,500 manufacturing jobs. And all that provided in part by a federal incentive, a production tax credit, federal tax credit. The biofuels industry was completely assessed and helped by public investment. There's a big fight in Washington right now whether we're going to continue subsidies to ethanol. If we want to do more solar and more distributed generation, which hasn't really been the approach in the United States. Mostly it's we produce power at this coal plant and we send it out to everybody. Mm-hmm. A lot of places now are saying we ought to generate power where we use it, at home and in business, and that has some opportunity to create jobs, not only in the construction of this equipment or the manufacture of this equipment, but you have to have somebody site it, you have to have somebody install it, you have to have somebody maintain it. there's a whole service industry of electricians, HVAC, building contractors. I mean, there's a lot of local jobs possible in this area. So that's one. The other is just in the area of energy efficiency. I mean, we have a lot of older buildings. We ought to be, and the president's been interested in this, and we have okay programs run by our utilities, but we need to do much, much more to help businesses and homeowners save energy at home. That is the lowest cost way to produce energy, is to save it in the first place and not need it. In this last session, we spent a fair amount of time on a proposal to build a new nuclear power plant in Iowa. So we have this conversation over here about green jobs, renewable energy, energy efficiency, all community-based work, versus a conversation over here about whether in one community we ought to have 1,000 jobs doing nuclear power, something that's very dirty, very expensive, and is in one part of the state. And so the idea that we should really have an economic development plan and an energy plan that gets people working all over the state, in every county, in every city, in town, some opportunity for some employment, as opposed to this, we're going to produce all the power here and send it out to you, and the people producing it making all the money.
I think it's safe to say that there were some hot button issues in this last session. Same-sex marriage, abortion, some other issues that kind of came out of nowhere, like the dove hunting bill. What do you think the 2012 session's hot button issue is going to be?
Well, I think it's going to be a replay of this session. I think there's going to be a lot of interest, I mean, on the 20-week abortion ban, which passed it's passed in a number of states. I think that will be back. People will want to debate that again. I think the anti-gay marriage agenda will be back again. I think it's both because people are just rabidly interested in those. It's cynically a way to get the Republican base fired up for the next election and get folks that care about these issues fired up and to the polls to sustain the majority they have. And so I think, unfortunately, we're going to probably spend more time on things that are dead. They're not going anywhere. The Senate is not going to pass restrictions on the ability of women to have control over their bodies and their reproductive health care decisions. It's not going to, I don't think that's going to happen, and I don't think we're going to move in any way to take away people's rights by changing our Constitution. So we'll spend time on those things. There'll be some headlines, some hubbub, but at the end of the day, those will not become law, at least during this next legislative session. I would say, I mean, this last cycle, the elections do matter. The consequences of this election were huge. We have money in the bank. We ought to be investing in education. We're not. That was a rational decision made by the people that we elected. And everybody, I'd just say, we want to make sure that every dollar we spend of the taxpayers is well invested, and we've done a lot over the last 4 years in downsizing state government, and through early retirement, through streamlining. But you've got to invest in people. You've got to, the wealth of the state, it comes from its people and the skills they have. And we have money to make those investments, and we're instead setting into the bank. I think the other big issue next session is whether or not we're going to have some sort of massive set of tax cuts to large out-of-state corporations and to millionaires. We have a surplus because of this decision not to invest in education and healthcare. And I think there'll be a clamoring by the Republicans to make for some sort of massive tax reduction for the wealthiest Iowans and for large out-of-state corporations. So I expect that to be one of the controversial policy issues that we'll deal with next session.
Well, Senator Bolkcom, thank you so much for sitting down with me. We really appreciate you taking the time.
Happy to be here. Happy to be here. Thanks.